Andrew Scheer is staying on as Conservative Party leader for now, but the questions he faced during the campaign
How has your opinion on homosexuality evolved?
have not gone away, and the answers have not changed.
Do you believe that being gay is a sin?
No, look, we made it very clear during the election, in the last few months and years, our party is inclusive. We believe in the equality of rights of all Canadians.
So is Scheer the right person to lead the party in this minority parliament and into another election? What do the months ahead look like for the Conservatives?
Adushu is here to talk about that and more. Chantal Hébert is in Calgary tonight. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Althea Raj is also in Toronto tonight. Good to see everybody. So it was an interesting press conference yesterday. A couple things struck me. I guess how little Mr. Scheer had seemed to have moved or progressed in any of his positions that didn't allow him to form government. And I guess the idea that he believed a lot of that was a communication problem during the campaign. Now, maybe he's just trying to keep things sort of, on the straight and narrow until this review comes up in April. But I wonder, I'll start with you, Chantal, what you made of what you heard from him yesterday.
That he's going to have to do a lot more if he's going to win a solid enough vote of confidence from the party members in April. I didn't expect him to have all of this figured out two weeks after the election, but it was not the kind of press conference that signals a lot of confidence or makes you say, finally, this guy, is maybe the best prime minister that we'll never have.
Andrew, I mean, I assumed other things were happening behind closed doors. We know some of them, and certainly he seemed to be pretty candid, I'm told, behind closed doors with members, but that wasn't what he presented publicly.
Yes, and the members decided not to take matters into their own hands via the Reform Act. They had the potential to do that, but they elected not to. So it will go back to the party membership. If I were a Conservative, I'd be very concerned about what the next 6 months are going to bring, because he has far from putting aside some pretty fundamental concerns that a lot of people have about his leadership, about his ability not just to communicate with Canadians, but the positioning of the party and how he is seen. I think if you had to guess, I think the next 6 months are going to be very messy and ugly within the Conservative Party, and with the potential for a very inconclusive result at the end of it. So they may regret not having, the caucus may have reason to regret not having taken matters into their own hands.
Althea, what did you make of yesterday?
Well, I don't think anybody expected, except maybe Andrew, that the caucus would take the matters into their own hands.
I didn't expect that.
You just said they might regret it.
Michael Zhang's bill that allowed caucus to do that was not actually popular within most in the Tory ranks. So, I mean, it's not a surprise that they didn't go that route. What struck me was, to your original point, was that nothing has changed from the campaign. He said the exact same words, pretty much to the letter, that he said after election night. And so, he's looking forward to bringing down the government at the earliest possible opportunity, which obviously makes sense for him. If there is such an opportunity before April, Andrew Scheer would still be the leader. The tone was the same tone. Coming out of 2015, you had Rona Ambrose and a lot of Conservative members of the backbench and the front bench come out and say, we learned the lessons of the campaign and we need to do things differently. We didn't hear any of that publicly this week. The other thing that I thought was interesting was he said communications, and yet he used the exact same line when he was asked about homosexuality being a sin. Was a pretty direct question, but he used the exact same words, and that issue is not going to go away. That question, same-sex marriage and abortion, are going to continue to plague him, and he's going to have to address that in some ways. He said the review was going to be about the structure, he suggested it was going to be about field and data. Mr. Barrett suggests the review is much wider and more open. Obviously, and interestingly, caucus chair also said that things were not unanimous behind closed doors. Yeah. And to Andrew's point, we're going to hear a lot more about that.
And the other reason why they may regret this is it's going to be all about him. It's going to be about, was he a good leader, was he a bad leader? Now, there's lots of reasons to criticize his leadership, but I think any fair-minded observer would say the Conservatives have much more fundamental problems than just their leader. They have to do a lot of rethinking about their basic approach, their basic policy approach. He has to take responsibility for the way in which they presented those policies and framed them in this campaign. But they've got to do a much more deeper rethink. And if all they're doing is having a referendum on his leadership, then that's going to be put off as well.
Andrew is right that the problem is not just Andrew Scheer's leadership, but while he will be working to keep that leadership, he stands to lose control of the process. And the two trains stand to go in different directions. I have a really hard time seeing how those 6 months to a year coming forward will be anything but wasted for the Conservative Party.
There are a lot of Conservative MPs who would like to have a real discussion about expanding the tent. At the moment, the Conservatives are only basically drilling to their own party, trying to get maybe an extra 4%. Their electoral strategy is vote splits on the left. There is, the lesson of this campaign should be, you got 16% in Quebec. You cannot get a majority government without reaching beyond your base. How are you going to do that? On what issues are you going to do that?
Okay, I want to switch gears to the Liberals today. I wouldn't say that the pressure is the same in any way, but current and defeated MPs have been in town today, and the topic of Western alienation came up, and Ralph Goodale was the one who talked a little bit about it. Here's what he had to say.
I'm concerned about the situation everywhere in the country where unity or a lack of unity is a very real issue. And in Western Canada at the moment, there are very substantial challenges that need to be met, and that will need to preoccupy the government.
Andrew, what kind of signals do you think the Prime Minister needs to send both to these premiers that he's going to be meeting, but also to the opposition leaders that he's going to meet next week?
Well, there's a difference between what he needs to send and what he's likely to send. If the Liberals took seriously sentiment in Western Canada, we wouldn't be where we're at. The brutal fact of the matter is they don't need to win a lot of seats in Western Canada to form a government. As long as you can get 3/4 of the seats in Ontario with 40% of the vote, you're halfway to a majority right there. Yeah. So they historically, going back for decades, Liberals have never really made a priority of trying to understand or reach out to the West. The numbers have changed over the years. It's more important to them politically perhaps than it might have been in the past, but not enough. And so yes, if you look at his reaction since the election, I mean, the Encana thing happened and not a peep out of them. They don't seem to be changing their course at all in the signals we're getting out of the course of the cabinet, et cetera. I mean, they think that this was a referendum on climate change and they won. It's just that a lot of the votes went to other parties, but parties on the left. They think they ran a pretty good campaign given the challenges they faced with blackface, et cetera. They don't seem to be in a hugely reflective mood as a result of that. And so I'm sure he'll be reaching out to these premiers because he has to. But I'm not sure it's going to be really the kind of life or death thing that people are perhaps urging upon them.
But he too is going to have to square a circle that's not easy to square. Yes, they need to somehow find a way to be as attentive to the prairies as they are to Ontario and Quebec. But Mr. Trudeau has a minority government now that depends for its survival on parties that actually wanted to stop building pipelines, that go further with the carbon tax. And at some point, the first and foremost concern of the Liberal government is going to be, one, to ensure the survival of the government, and two, to be in a good place to win back a majority sooner rather than later. So how you're going to reconcile managing what is happening in the prairies and the political needs of the Liberals that do not ride on what is happening in the prairies is going to be difficult.
And you can even say it stronger is they see their route back to majority in Quebec, not in the West.
Yeah, I mean, it might even be impossible, what Chantal has laid out there. Althea, go ahead.
Well, you also have two premiers in Alberta and Saskatchewan who want a fight. And while the Prime Minister's office may say that the Prime Minister wants to sit down and find common ground, and maybe there'll be something in the budget that's an indication of an opening of some sort, it's hard to see where that common ground can be found, to Chantal's point, because the takeaway for the people around Justin Trudeau seems to have been that this is a government and a parliament that should be more progressive and more focused on climate change. And right now, the discussions internally are as much about what to do about Quebec. Should they have a Quebec lieutenant? How to address some of the fact that they lost a bunch of seats and they didn't have the gains that they were hoping to have, and they have the bloc now and they're fighting with potentially Premier Legault. That is as much a preoccupation in some ways, if not more so, than I'd say how to get a foothold back in Western Canada.
So those meetings he has next week, Andrew, with the opposition leaders, how important are those to showing them that he is committed to sticking around a little while.
I imagine it's mostly just to nail down what are the areas in which they can work together. It's going to be different issues. It's pretty clear that they're going to go issue by issue, bill by bill.
Yeah.
There are different bills in which they could find different support from different parties. So as we've talked about, there was a 2/3 majority in this election for carbon pricing, but there was also a 2/3 majority for pipelines. There was a 2/3 majority to cut taxes at the bottom end of the spectrum. So they'll find their support where they can. Just back on the premiers, it's going to be interesting to me to see what role, if any, premiers from Manitoba and Ontario are going to play in this. Given Alberta and Saskatchewan have staked out such fierce opposition, Doug Ford in particular, that government has been trying desperately in the last few months to stake out a somewhat more moderate approach to things. There's an opportunity for him, if he seizes it, to try to be an intermediary perhaps between the federal government and these more antagonistic premiers.
The takeaway in the Ontario Premier's office has been that a lot of the seats that he won went back to the Liberals. And they were Liberal and they went PC and provincially, but they went federally Liberal. And I think that surprised some of them, realizing that maybe it wasn't Mr. Ford's message, but really just the hatred of Kathleen Wynne that won them, and that there is now a partner here that they might be more flexible to work with than they would have been 6 months ago.
Okay, last word to Chantal.
I'm hoping that it didn't take the federal election for Mr. Ford and his party to realize that they owe power to fatigue with the Liberals and Kathleen Wynne. But to Ford's probable satisfaction, he can at least say that he didn't put his name on the federal ballot.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody. I'll see some of you next week. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week, we are going to talk about Elizabeth May stepping down as Green Party leader. That, too, happened this week. Look for it on iTunes, any major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.